Welcome to the Explainer. We trust doctors with our lives, right? But have you ever stopped to think about how we make sure they can actually understand us when every second counts? Well, today we're diving into the hidden science of testing a doctor's words.
So picture this. You're in an emergency room. You're trying to explain what's wrong. The person treating you is a brilliant, highly trained doctor from another country. Their medical skills? Absolutely top-notch. But is their English good enough to catch every little detail of what you're saying and for you to understand them back? This isn't just about language, you see. It's about patient safety. For millions of health professionals who train overseas and want to work in places like the US, the UK, or Australia, proving they can communicate well isn't just a suggestion, it's a requirement. This is way more than just passing a test. It's about making sure they can handle those incredibly high-stakes conversations that happen in a hospital every single day.
And that, right there, is the huge problem for the people who design these tests. How on earth do you create an exam in some quiet little room that can actually predict how someone will perform in the controlled chaos of a real clinic? It's a puzzle, and getting it wrong has massive consequences for all of us. Now, this challenge actually has a name in the world of language testing. It's called the authenticity puzzle, and it's all about this one big question. Can a test ever be a truly real reflection of the job it's supposed to be a gateway to? So, what is authenticity? Well, at its heart, it's just the bridge between the test and the real world. Think about it like a driver's license. The written test is great for checking if you know the rules of the road, but it's the behind-the-wheel exam that gives you the authentic test of whether you can actually drive. So the real question becomes, how do you create that behind-the-wheel test for a doctor's communication skills? And what's so interesting is that this is not a new problem at all. For decades, experts have been arguing about whether a perfectly authentic test is even possible. Some, like Bernard Spolsky way back in 1985, said the whole quest was chimerical, basically like chasing a unicorn. Because let's be honest, a test by its very nature is always going to be a little bit artificial. But just because it's hard doesn't mean people have stopped trying. So let's look at one of the biggest real-world attempts to solve this exact puzzle. We're going to dive into a case study of the Occupational English Test, or OET for short. And the OET is a really big deal. It's not just for one or two jobs. It covers 12 different health professions. We're talking doctors and nurses, of course, but also dentists, pharmacists, even veterinarians. And each one of those jobs has its own unique way of communicating, which the test has to somehow account for. So here's a quick look at how it's set up. The listening and reading parts are pretty general for everyone, but, and this is the clever part, to really boost that authenticity, the writing and speaking sections are specific to your job. So a doctor might get a task where they have to explain a diagnosis to a patient, while a physical therapist might have to walk someone through an exercise plan. It's their way of trying to make the test feel much more like the actual job. Okay, but here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. Even with this clever, specialized design, hospitals and medical boards started raising some red flags. They were seeing professionals who had passed the OET, but were still really struggling to communicate effectively once they were on the ward. It seemed like passing the test just wasn't the whole story. This gap between a test score and how someone actually performed on the job was a serious problem. So serious, in fact, that it kicked off a massive 3-year research project in Australia to figure out exactly what was going on. They really wanted to get to the bottom of this disconnect. And the way they did it was just brilliant. First, instead of just guessing what mattered, they went straight to the source. They asked experienced doctors, nurses, and physios, hey, what does good communication actually look like day to day? Then they took all those insights and built brand new, clinically focused criteria for scoring the test. And finally, this is the best part, they brought those same experts back in, had them watch recordings of the test, and asked them the ultimate question. Is this person safe to practice? And what they uncovered was absolutely fascinating. It turns out there's a huge difference in how language experts, the folks who usually build these tests, and the clinical health professionals on the front lines see the very same conversation. And right here, this is the big aha moment. The language raters, they were focused on the traditional stuff. Is the grammar correct? Are they speaking fluently? But the health professionals, they were looking for something completely different. They cared about clinical effectiveness. Did the doctors show empathy? Did they build a connection with the patient? Did they explain complex things clearly without a bunch of jargon? And, crucially, did they stop and check that the patient actually understood? It wasn't just about speaking English well. It was about communicating well as a clinician. This was a huge discovery, and its impact went way beyond just this one test. It really changed how we think about authenticity in any specialized field. The goal wasn't to create a perfect carbon copy of reality anymore. And this brings us to a much smarter way of looking at it. Authenticity isn't just a simple yes or no. As testing experts Bachman and Palmer put it, it's a relative quality. The real goal is to find that perfect balance, to create a test that respects the views of both the language experts and the domain experts, the doctors, the engineers, the pilots, who are actually doing the job every day. So what's the bottom line here? Well, first, authenticity just means a test has to reflect the real world. Second, and this is so important, what language experts think is good can be totally different from what people in the field think is good. The absolute best tests find a way to bring both of those views together. And, these lessons don't just apply to healthcare. They're true for testing in just about any specialized field you can think of. Which really brings us to our final thought. If this level of detail and care is necessary for healthcare, and it absolutely is, just think about all the other high-stakes jobs where clear communication is life or death. What are we missing? Where else should we be solving the authenticity puzzle next?